I'm excited to put a little milestone marker in our relationship today because we're going to be talking about your founder journey on the back of a fantastic liquidity event. And I was doing a little bit of a look back to figure out, like, when did we first connect? Turns out March 2016, and my friend Brendan O'Donnell, who I worked with at Yammer, sent me an email saying he wanted to introduce me to this fellow Roy, who is the CEO of some company called Effect Layer, and said we both enjoy speaking. Do you remember this connection?
I do.
Yeah, it's fantastic. So Brendan, for those of you who don't know, Brendan was head of revenue operations at Yammer, went on to, in fact, become a venture capitalist. It's funny how the world works. And he was the fellow who brought us together, which has been a fantastic relationship. We've known each other and worked together since that time. And today, I'm really looking forward to hearing about your journey and perhaps helping both founders and employees of venture-backed companies understand what it's like to go from the journey of right at the beginning all the way to a successful exit at over $500 million. So you ready to have a chat with me about this stuff?
I'm always ready. Just wish that we could be doing it in person. Let's go.
Well, actually, to that point, this is an interesting one. So here I am in Las Vegas. Most people know that about. Where are you today, Roy?
I'm in Basel, Switzerland.
Basel, Switzerland. Now, am I correct in remembering that the cost of living in Switzerland is very low? Is that right?
I think it may be the only place in the world more expensive than San Francisco, but it is beautiful out here.
It is beautiful. And for those of you who don't know Roy Raanani, go and check out his LinkedIn profile. Beautiful background. It's going to make you wish that you were in Basel also. So why don't we get started at the beginning and talk about the order in which folks should be thinking about building their go-to-market team. So a lot of conjecture around this, but here's a fellow who has done this for real. So Roy, can you take us back to the start? How did you think through this? And perhaps we'll get into a few learnings about the order of operations, who to bring in, when and how, and dig into a couple of topics around that.
Yeah, it's, as I was thinking about this, I'm trying to put myself back into the frame of mind of how little we knew in the early days. And so in retrospect, a lot of things start to feel obvious. And so just one of the things I want to stress for anybody listening is that things may seem obvious in retrospect. And the question really is, how do you navigate these types of decisions in the fog of building a startup? So I'll share what we did, and then I'll share some of the mistakes, maybe in retrospect, that we learned kind of going deeper through it. So when we started, I was the original salesperson. I was out there doing a lot of the sales calls, closing many of the deals, and so on and so forth. And then at some point, once we realized we had a product that we could get up and running, the first real key hire that I made was somebody to head customer success. And the reason for that, and this was a generalist, it was somebody that I'd worked with in the past in my consulting life named Dominic Facher. And I hired him straight out of Stanford Business School. He took a measly salary to join the team, had never done customer success before, but was just somebody that was a really strong generalist, really cared about the customer, and wanted to be a part of building this startup and solving this problem.
This is a very interesting point. So I think you hire CS first. There were two things you said. One was you as founder were doing the original sales. I'd love to know, can you remember roughly how many customers you had when you brought in Dominic? And let's follow it up in a minute. When we talk about when you brought your first sales hire, how many customers, if you remember, you had then? And the reason is, I've been speaking to a number of founders in the last 6 months. In fact, I've recently invested in a company where the CEO hired, albeit offshored them lower cost, half a dozen salespeople, very junior, before they actually had any paying customers. And I kind of lost my mind. So can you remember how many customers you had when Dominic came in?
Yeah, I think that we had probably onboarded, maybe 10 beta customers or design customers. And by the way, many of these customers ended up no longer being customers once we figured out the product market fit and the segments that we were going after. But I think it's really important in the early days to just get to 10 or 20 different companies that are using your products, that you can understand the nuances of their systems and how they use the platform and what they're looking for, the value prop, and all of those types of things, just to figure out what resonates. And so I went hard to go through that process. And I'd never done sales before. But I really think that is it's not truly sales. It's customer discovery. It's understanding the pain points. It's deeply understanding the customer. And it's the type of thing that ultimately allows you to build the right product for those customers. And so to your earlier point, I would be very worried about a company that's outsourcing that, because unless it's extremely clear what you're building. I mean, if you decided to rebuild Zoom in a slightly different way and you thought that you had a decent product that met the needs of a segment of the market, I could understand going and hiring salespeople, other salespeople relatively early. In our case, we were creating a new category of software. Nobody had been using it before. There are so many different types of sales teams that use different systems, different motions, and so on and so forth, that for me, selling was part and parcel with figuring things out.
Yeah, and I think that's 100% correct. I can't imagine how you believe you'd bring salespeople into a company where you hadn't figured out to whom you were selling, what the value proposition was, and some rough idea of what a proxy sales process would look like. But so that's interesting. So the catch, was one of the key points around that was that you said you had, give or take, 10 or so customers. Is that what I heard? Yeah. And do you remember roughly what sort of revenue that would have looked like way back in then, or is that a bit of a distant memory?
It was, it was smaller, but they were, some of them were small customer startups like Stitch Labs, which was acquired by Square. Some of it was Qualtrics, which is still a customer today, with over 1,000 sellers. But at the time, it might have only been, 20 or 25 people that were using the earliest versions of the product. So it wasn't really about revenue so much as it was, have we gotten to a point where we've built something that is valuable to folks?
Got it. Understood.
So,
and where did it go from there?
So Dominic was the first person who was doing customer success, and customer success was really about deeply understanding the customer, helping them get value of the platform, and understanding the issues. And so, one thing that I think was quite interesting was that after about 6 to 12 months of doing that job, Dominic became our head of product, because he so deeply understood what the customers needed and what the issues were with the product. And he was interfacing so closely with our engineers to fix issues, to add functionality, and so on and so forth, that it just felt natural for him to take over the product roadmap. And it happened very organically, but it was absolutely the right decision. And he's still running product at Chorus, now ZoomInfo, 5 years later. So first there was that. Once we felt that we had something that was valuable to people, right, where you're starting to get that positive feedback, and it's very, it's a very well understood concept that at the beginning your product is going to be buggy and it's not going to be perfect, but you're looking for that group of customers that value what you're doing so much, or have such a pain point that they're willing to put up with all of the issues. And I think that once you can understand that, and you've gotten to a product to a point where it can deliver on that promise and make those folks happy, that's when you can say, all right, let's start to figure out how to do this in a more repeatable way. And at that point, I brought on Rob Perez, who took us from 0 to over $1 million in revenue. And he was, the very classic 0 to 1, the perfect 0 to 1 guy. He had done early stage in the past at a company called TalentBin that was run by Pete Kazanji. He had done the SDR role. He had run the SDR team. He had taken on sales. He had ran the sales team. And so you need somebody who is very comfortable when there's no infrastructure in place, when there's no structure, when there's no playbook, when there's no scripts, when there's really nothing, and is comfortable going in and figuring that out. And so Rob was just extremely good at that. And I think we got really fortunate to have brought him on. And so, we brought Rob on. Now, in retrospect, what didn't we have, right? We didn't have a dedicated marketing function in place. And in retrospect, that was a huge mistake, because you can only scale as quickly as your pipeline. it sounds obvious, but let's just kind of put it out there. You can only scale. So your limiting factor is going to be your pipeline, how quickly you can build it, how many folks you have in it, and so on and so forth. And when you're early on, if you try to go outbound, for example, with an SDR team or with emails, and you're selling something that people aren't familiar with, your hit rate is obviously going to be low because you just, you're firing 1,000 bullets. And if you're lucky, 5 or 10 of them might be those people that completely align with your view of the future and how people should be using a product like yours. And, in our case, that they should be reviewing sales meetings and they should be coaching on them and they should be creating repeatable processes and so on and so forth. Not every sales leader thinks that way. So when you go outbound, you're going to have a low hit rate. By contrast, if you're really good at evangelizing what you're doing with the right type of marketing, content marketing, and so on and so forth, you put it out there and the people that it resonates with will find it because they're searching for it or whatever, it'll resonate and then they'll come inbound. And so I think that we probably tried to do a little bit too much, and we should have, in retrospect, really focused on content marketing and product marketing, use that to articulate how our best customers were using our platform, getting value out of it, educating people on everything that they're doing, build up a really efficient inbound motion, and then and only then start to focus on looking for those signals in companies that could tell you, hey, this is a sales leader or a company that is more likely than not to be interested in what you're building.
Yeah, we probably need to put this on loop 5 times because so often I see people saying, well, I've built the product, now it's time to hire sales. This happens all the time and it stuns me because there's so much good information out there about it. So it's really interesting that you would share that. I appreciate it. And, how would you respond to this? Because a lot of the founders I speak to say, yeah, but we hire marketing, I build this great pipeline, I've got no one to sell it. Right? No one to sell it. How do you respond to that?
Well, I think, so first of all, I think there's always somebody there to sell it, right? Like whether it's the founder or somebody else. And so it's not a bad thing, I think, to have that. You can also hire, for example, like 2 individual account executives that you could work with, right? So in the same way that you do a division of labor, you might say, hey, you know what? I'm going to handle the really key discovery calls and the demos at the very beginning. And so, in that portion of the sales process where the customer's trying to figure out if this is right for me, you can handle that as the founder. And then once they've decided that there's interest because you as a founder were able to articulate the value and get them excited and instill that confidence, then you partner with an account executive to help really effectively run that process. Which is obviously extremely valuable and time consuming, and you can just start to parallel process more. But I think that the marketing piece is absolutely critical. And marketing, it's one of those things where if somebody had drawn me a Gantt chart with lead times for filling certain roles and then doing the work and seeing the impact, marketing has probably the longest lead time of both, for me, in my opinion, of finding the right person, because product marketing in a startup is really the vision of the founders and the category and what you're building. So to find the right person is not easy. And then, there's that famous saying that 9 women can't make a baby in 1 month. And a lot of the time you're under so much pressure to grow revenue that you think, okay, let's try to rush through this process of creating content and educating people and getting it syndicated and getting it out there and ranking on Google and so on and so forth. And you just don't realize, or at least I didn't realize, my goodness, there's an extremely long lead time here and you can't rush it. And so you start to, then you can run into a situation where you've committed these numbers to your board and you're getting all this great feedback, but you're saying, oh my goodness, we're not getting the natural sort of pipeline generation in a scalable way that we were expecting. Now we have to go supplement it. Okay, let's start building, SDR teams and so on and so forth. And now you're trying to do 2 things at once, each of which is not an easy thing to go solve as a startup. And so, I think that was probably the biggest lesson. And paired with marketing, I think is what we are now calling revenue operations. But this idea of just making sure that you have a solid data set, whether it's a well set up CRM, you have data from ZoomInfo or somebody like that, where you can articulate, these are the companies that we're going after, these are the people that we're talking to, and just all of that. Because I realized in retrospect, I was asking Rob to basically do 5 jobs, and each of them are a full-time job. It's too much.
I say this to when you're a first-time VP at a startup, I say, guess what? 50 to 60% of your job initially is sales ops, right? Because no one set up the CRM properly. No one knows where your account and contact data is coming from. No one, and so forth. And you're designing the sales process and so forth and so on. And if that's why, if you hire your first head of sales, call them what you will, from a large company, they're going to struggle because they've never done that before. They walked into an engine, or they have deep revenue/sales operations support, right? But early on, I'm guessing Rob was all over your Salesforce instance and all that, right?
Exactly. And so that's the it's one of those interesting things where I'd also say you really can't think in silos. You can't think in functions, because it really just is, as you stated in your question, it's go to market. And that means, maybe the right person to build this system is the product team, because they're familiar with data and they're comfortable with databases and all the rest of it. And, you're just all talking together to say, well, who is this product built for? And what types of customers do we want to go after? And you're creating those lists together, and so on and so forth.
Can we tie this together perhaps before we talk about, as we get through this phase into Series A, what do you look for? What should people be looking for in terms of their first few go-to-market hires? If you could generalize for me.
Yeah, I think let's see here. I think the first thing is somebody who's. I default to people that are just smart. I think that this is really hard, and so you want somebody that has high bandwidth and is just creative, and a generalist, right? So somebody who's curious, logical, rational, and all the rest of it, but a good generalist. I think number 2 is, that 0 to 1 mindset. So, I think there are 2 types of people. There are people that feel really comfortable with an empty or a blank Google Doc. And there are people that really are effective and good at tweaking and editing and improving. And for this job, you need somebody who, their default is, if there's a blank whiteboard and you're in the middle of a conversation, feels comfortable just going in and sketching out, hey, here's the framework. Let's start with this. Let's start putting some things down. Let's start iterating. Let's start tweaking, et cetera. Because there's so much creating from scratch, right? Okay, what's the email sequence going to be? Okay, what should that intro email be? How should we talk about this? How should we do this? How should we do that? And so you're always creating from scratch. Oh my goodness, this customer is asking for a case study. We don't have a case study. Well, we don't have a marketer either. So who's going to create the case study, right? And so you want the type of person that's just going to say, all right, hey, it's Friday afternoon. I don't have any calls booked. I'm just going to bang out a case study in, the next couple of hours based on this customer that I sold to, 2 months ago that I know really well. And it's not going to be perfect, but they'll do it. And I remember this one situation with Rob, where he implemented a contract system, and it was PandaDoc, right? So e-signature for our customers. And what PandaDoc did at the time, this was many, many years ago, was they allowed you to basically include quotes and value propositions and all of these things. So it wasn't just the contract. It was, here's the value proposition, here's what you're buying, here's some customer quotes. We didn't have anything like that. And Rob just, over a weekend, put this thing together. And the next time we sent a contract out, it looked really good. And, that's the type of thing where you just say, oh my goodness, this just, made us that little bit more professional. And it might help us squeeze out a couple more dollars on the quote, or, improve the close rate or whatever else. And so you need that sort of mentality. And the last one is, I'm a big believer in when you're building a startup, you don't know what you're doing. And your job, and I don't remember who said this, this is not my idea, but your job is to basically prove yourself wrong, right? So as quickly as possible, figure out what's wrong with your worldview and go fix it. And so I like people who develop a mental model of the entire ecosystem, right? Like, so who is it specifically that's buying? Why are they buying? How does this conversation actually start in a company, right? If they've never heard about us, and who brings it up, and what's actually the incentive for them to bring it up, and what's going to persuade them, and then what do they do, and really just trying to understand how everything fits together. And then you have things that you can test thoughtfully, and you'll do something, and you'll say, oh well, if this worldview is right, if it really is, an individual sales rep who asks for this coaching, then if we do this, it should work. And then you try it and you see it doesn't work. And you're like, okay, well, that's probably not the way people are buying. Let's go try something else. And so they're thinking about that entire system and how it fits together and using that to come up with ideas and test them.
Yeah, I like that. And I'll steal someone else's and paraphrase. You talk about having a worldview. And for the founders out there, one of the things someone said about entrepreneurship is the idea that you can imagine the way you wish the world was, right, in the future, and or is going to be, and then pull it to today, right? And I think the absolute nuance there is, people, for example, could have imagined call recording some years ago and then conversational analysis. But if you did it too early, the technology wouldn't have been there to actually execute successfully. So the formula doesn't work without nuance. And, obviously you guys nailed it. And so I love that you have a mental model for thinking about that in terms of, without using glib terms like failing fast, it's about, to your point, testing hypotheses and throwing them out as fast as possible such that you can arrive on the right conclusion, right? I think it's fantastic. So now if we could take ourselves a little bit further forward in your journey, perhaps, and talk about getting into Series A, right? And for those of you who don't know, that's typically your first significant institutional round of funding. And I'd love to know how you knew you were ready. And then from that point, if you're a new hire joining a Series A company, it'd be great for you to talk about what culture's like at that point and sort of how complete the processes are and amount of resources available. But to start with, how did you know it was time to do this?
Yeah, so, it's funny. Like I said a little bit earlier, when you're building a startup, the goal is really to de-risk key parts of the business. And as you do that, the value of the company should go up, in theory, right? And so, at the very beginning, it was just like you said, will the technology work? Can we record and transcribe and analyze these calls? Is the accuracy of the transcription going to be high enough to deliver on the value that our customers need, right? Is the natural language processing going to work? Can we generate useful insights? Are there patterns between top performers and others? These were all things that when we started, we had an instinct that this should work now, but you don't know until you try. Then there are other questions related to the actual market and the users. Like, to this day, when somebody asks me what Chorus does and I explain it, the first thing people will say, oh, isn't that Big Brother? How are any sales reps okay with being recorded? And, I have to say, it's so funny. It's still a good question, but, our net promoter score is close to 70, which is on par with the iPhone. So sales reps obviously love it, but there's this question, right? Are sales reps going to be okay with it? Are customers or the prospects going to be okay being recorded? Are the legal teams going to be okay with the way that you're disclosing these things? So in the early days, these were all, very big risks that our investors were taking, that we were taking, that we were trying to de-risk. And so, once you do that, then you start thinking, okay, can we scale this and all the rest of it? And so you're trying to de-risk these things. What ends up happening in many venture-backed startups, and I think that it's even more extreme now than it was in 2016 when we raised our Series A, is that you'll often get preempted. So the short answer is that if an investor sees that you've got something working, and there was great buzz in our market from our customers and just word of mouth because it was exciting and it was new and it was valuable, that many investors reached out to us, and I would say we weren't ready for the Series A. Like, we had de-risked a lot, and we had very happy customers that were recommending the product, with all the issues that still existed, and without having every feature and functionality that you would want at that point. And so, if the money's there, you take the money, because you don't know what could happen. And so you take the money. I think that part of it is just, and I would remind the team of this, I would say, look, just because we're a Series A by funding does not mean that we're a Series A by de-risking. And so let's be really clear about where we are as a company and what we need to go do. And the real feedback only comes from your customers, right? They're the only ones that don't have an incentive, to tell you what you want to hear. So we still had open questions that we needed to go answer, but we did know we had a working product, right? It worked. You could set it up. I could go to a friend of mine and say, yes, if you set us up, you will not be embarrassed. This will work. You will not get fired. Your boss will be impressed. Number two, we knew that we had happy customers. We had good NPS. Customers were expanding usage. They were telling their friends. And, this is important, we knew where our next 250 customers were going to come from. So, once you get that money in the bank, investors don't like it just sitting there. And so there is often pressure on founders and on these early companies to put the money to work. It's that classic story of, you jump off a cliff and hope to build the plane before you hit the ground. You do need to take some risk and just say, look, I'm going to start building this go-to-market engine, realizing it may take 6 to 9 months, and realizing that, okay, that's another 6 to 9 months to continue improving the product, eliminate bugs and so on and so forth. So there's a lot of that going on. When it comes to the employees, and, I'm so grateful to those people, and I know them all by name, and I've thanked them profusely because many of them are still at Chorus. Those types of employees, I think, number one, they're in it for the mission. They're very passionate about the mission, and what you're doing. Number two, they need to be very scrappy. It's still going to be an environment where you learn by doing, where you learn from others, where, in our case, we were using Chorus a lot, just drinking our own champagne, so to speak. You're developing processes as you go. You don't have all the collateral that you need. So you're still figuring out and building a lot. The benefit, though, is that you have a strong foundation, right? You have a working product. You have demos that work well. You have customers that you can reference. So everything is just easier, but there's still a lot of that creation that's going on.
Yeah, so I want to pull up a point you made, which is about really, really being invested in the product and the mission and the vision. So if anyone's thinking of joining a Series A company, it can't be just because you think, well, if I get in early, maybe I'll win the lottery and get a big. I always tell people set that one aside, because the chances of hitting it are so low relative to the opportunities you'll be presented with. But secondly, it can't just be a job at Series A. I believe you have to have a sort of a simpatico or a connection to the vision of the founders at that stage, where you genuinely get excited about the impact you're going to make, because it's so hard. And because what you think you're going to be doing when you join the company is quite different to what you are doing 12 months in, So I really appreciate you making that point. And I think I would like people to dwell on it, because I think people join those companies for the wrong reasons. And one of the right reasons is because you're just in love with the purpose of what that company is.
Yeah. And I think I would just add one other thing, which is the people, right? I mean, I would also say that, one of the most valuable things are the people that you're meeting. And so if you're working on a company that's tackling a really challenging problem and a really big problem, that's going to attract, it's not easy to attract world-class people from world-class opportunities to come join you. And so if you can find a place where you say, hey, I'm going to learn a lot working with these people, and I'm going to enjoy that time in the trenches. In the worst case, like you said, if it doesn't work out, you leave with, incredible personal relationships and professional relationships. And that may be where your next role comes from, right? That person may go start another company. They may go join another company. There's so much that can happen. And yeah, like you said, in every offer letter that I signed, I would explain to people that startup equity is only worth something in 3 situations. One is if the company stops investing for growth and pays dividends, which does not happen in tech. 2 is if you go public. 3 is if you get acquired. And I think that today you could add, a 4th, which is secondaries, right? So if somebody down the line decides to buy some of your shares off you. And what that really means is you need to say, okay, do I believe this company could truly go public? Could they be a public company? And do I know what it means? Or, do I believe that there's an acquirer that would pay, a meaningful amount for this company? And like you said, it's just those companies are few and far between. And there's a lot that's out of your control. So
honestly, what you've just said, it's funny you should say. Over the weekend, I was thinking I want to write an in-depth article and give specific examples about that thing. Joining a company with proven folks with strong networks and relationships is 9 times out of 10 can be far more valuable than on a risk-adjusted basis than some sort of equity grant you're going to get. And I'll call one out because I think you should. There's a company called Qualified right now, qualified.com. And I know so many folks there who are ex-Salesforce. And I look at the trajectories they've had and the companies they've built since they left Salesforce. We're talking companies like Twilio, for example, and now they're there. They recently took a round of funding, but they're early. So high risk, brilliant product by the looks of it. But would I, but for running my own company, join that company? In a heartbeat, because of the people that are already there. And to your point, Roy, if I got to spend 2 years with those folks demonstrating my value and learning from them, so much more valuable than almost anything else I can imagine when you think of the dividends it pays decades later,
Yeah,
so,
life is a long repeated game. So, it all comes down to the people. Even when I look back at the entire course journey, the thing that stands out the most are the people and the relationships and the friendships that I made along the way with, not just with employees, with customers, folks like you that I didn't know before that I now consider a close friend. I mean, this is what matters, right? What else matters in life?
Exactly, 100%. But if we're building a startup, what matters is more fuel in the tank. So maybe we can spend just a brief moment, like we transition to Series B. What are people expecting of a founder at Series B? Like, what does the company have to look like to sort of get through that successfully?
Yeah, so once you get to Series B, the expectation is that the product is fully dialed in. So there are no questions about product market fit, right? So, this needs to be a product where your customers absolutely love it, couldn't live without it, are thrilled about it, and where there's also at this point, I think, no question about the size of the market opportunity. It's really about, okay, if we can scale this go-to-market engine, the sky's the limit. Like we should really go be able to do that. And so you expect there to be the beginnings of a repeatable and scalable sales process. And so, the question that I would always ask the team is, if $100 million showed up in the bank account tomorrow morning, would we know how to put it to use? Could we put it to use? And when you frame it that way, it actually, it sort of, if you look to a VP of marketing and you say, hey, if I gave you $20 million, would you know what to do with it? And, all of a sudden you say, people start to realize, okay, wait a minute, maybe we're not quite there yet. Maybe we don't know where this next $100 million of pipeline is going to come from and how we're going to build it and all the rest of it. And so those are the types of things that you want to have thought through because you're going to get a big injection of growth capital. And then, of course, at that point, you want to already have a good sense of your metrics, your growth metrics. So things like your gross dollar retention, your net dollar retention, your customer acquisition cost, and your lifetime value. And investors, these are often the metrics that growth investors are looking at in order to decide whether or not you're ready for a growth round. And so internally, a lot of the questions should be around, are we measuring these things? Do we understand it? How does it vary by segment? And so on and so forth. And I think that at that point, the people that you're bringing on, I don't want to say that they need to be less creative, but I would say the majority of the people that you're bringing on, are people that can execute, right? Where, hey, if you set them up for success, by educating them and training them and giving them the tools, they should be able to be successful. And so, and I think at that point also, I would say, you start to see, and maybe this is a bad thing to say, but I think it's the truth. You start to see a little bit more silos coming up in organizations because things can now start to be run more independently, right? Hey, we have a pipeline number, we have a product roadmap, we have, expansion numbers and renewal numbers for customer success. And everybody sort of they're spending a lot more time within their teams than they are across all the teams trying to get those systems and processes going.
Yeah, that makes total sense to me. And in fact, the early hires you would have brought on would have been bad hires if the first time they entered your organization at this stage, because they are builders and they don't like painting within the lines, the way I always think about it. When you get to that scaling size, you don't want people breaking the rules. It's like, no, I need you to enforce this process because we know it works, right? Don't go scribbling around the edges, So yeah, it's very interesting. I've got to say, it came up for me before, but I totally have NPS envy. So we're at 40, and I thought we were doing pretty good at SaaSy. That's 70. That is amazing. So kudos to the team. That is really, really impressive. But speaking of the team, a lot of founders will reflect on with me about learnings they had about hiring, and I'd love for you to reflect on that, because not every hire works out perfectly. And great founders like you always think of it in the context of not the person, but the fit. We have positions that, there's a jigsaw puzzle out there that'll fit perfectly to this spot. And oftentimes we don't pick the right jigsaw puzzle. How do you reflect on that in situations where perhaps you didn't make the right call? What have you learned?
Yeah, I think that, I think the first thing I would say is that a lot of startups are being run by first-time founders. And the challenge there is that they're the unknown unknowns. And so sometimes in these situations, if something is not working out, it can be very hard to know, is it me? Is it the situation? Is it the person? And so I want to say, I don't think that this is a science, meaning I don't actually know if I'm right. Whatever answer I'm going to give you, I don't know that I'm right. It's my read of the situation. My takeaway is that most of the time, if something didn't work out, it was my fault, right? So there's no bad person. There's the wrong person for the wrong, for a certain stage of the company. There's the wrong person for a certain role, and things like that. And so I really do think it's a reflection of the hiring manager or the leader or the company more so than it is the person. Sometimes I didn't know exactly what type of skills the person needed, because unless you've gone deep and solved a certain problem yourself, you don't know what it will take. And that's why I think when I mentioned some of the early hires, I index so much on just horsepower and curiosity and being a generalist, because you hope that they'll be able to solve whatever the problem ends up being, but you don't necessarily know exactly what it's going to be. Sometimes, like I had a situation with a revenue leader where I brought them in, and within a couple of months thought, it's not the right person, it's not working out, and made a change. And when I looked back at that situation, I realized, I still don't think that person was the right person for the company that we were at that exact time. But I would also say, knowing what I know now, there's no way that person could have figured it out in 4 months. Right? So you're still making that difficult call, but I would say, even the right person, it would have taken them X months longer in order to solve that particular issue, because you don't know what you don't know. Right. So that's why I think the trust component is so big there. And if you're going to make a decision, make the decision, trust the person, and sort of go, support them in the way that you can. And I think the last point that I would make is, any time that I made a mistake, it was because I was hiring somebody to solve a problem. And oftentimes, like, asking somebody else to solve a problem that you can't solve yourself is not setting them up for success. And so, if you have a problem and somebody says, oh my goodness, just go hire this person, they'll solve it for you. I think they're very unlikely to solve that problem. I think that you need to look within your team, and you just need to say, hey guys, we have this problem. We need to at least get to a 70% answer on it, because if we can't figure it out, and we've been doing this for 2 or 3 years, and we know our customers, and we have all the context, and we know how to get things done within the company, the likelihood of somebody brand new coming in and being able to solve this for us in 3 months is very, very low. And so, sometimes I think you're just dealing with so many different issues that you think, oh, I'll parallel process by hiring amazing people and asking them to go own the issue. And in some situations, the right answer might just be, you know what, it's just going to take more time. Let's pick the most important problem. Let's focus on it as a team. Let's figure out what's causing it. Let's solve it. Then let's move on to the next one. And then hire somebody to go take it over and take it from, 0 to 1 up to, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
They're so wise. And, the thing that keeps popping up for me as you're speaking is that founder that says, I'm a product guy or gal. I don't sell. So we haven't sold anything. I don't know how to sell. It's not working. So I'm going to hire a professional salesperson to come in and start selling. Like, without marketing, without being a co-founder, you know what I mean? It's like, to your exact point, sort of thinking someone else will fix your problem. It's in the too hard basket, and it almost never works out. So they're really, really insightful. And to that point, one of the unknown unknowns can be in some way solved by surrounding yourself with really strong advisors. And, as you know, I've been an advisor to a number of companies, and I think some of those relationships I felt very good about because I felt well utilized and engaged, and others not so much. What's your advice? You've had a number of advisors. How do you think about that in terms of establishing the right advisory relationship and getting maximum value from it?
Yeah, it's funny because now I'm on the other side of it, as other founders ask me to advise, and so I'm also getting to see how people are doing it. I think there are a couple of things. One is being really clear and upfront with the advisor around what your expectation is. How are they going to help? If it's very simple, if you're in the really early days and the point is, hey Matt, I need you to introduce me to 20 VPs of sales that run these types of sales teams so that we can get early beta customers or product feedback. And if you do that, you've checked the box. This is the reason why I'm bringing you on. If it's, hey, we just need somebody with your perspective to spend 4 hours a month with our product team, being, giving ruthless product feedback and, just being there as a subject matter expert, so that they don't have to waste the time of our customers because, VPs of sales are extremely busy. Then it's literally just, are you putting the time in with my team? And so on and so forth. So I think that that's really important. Advisor equity vests on a monthly basis. You can always choose to stop that vesting if the advisor is not providing equity. Realistically, that never happens because I think there's too much social capital invested. So it's very unlikely, I think, that a founder is just going to say, hey, you're not adding value. But what I did find now is there's a platform called Get Cabal, if I'm saying that right, CABAL. I'm not an investor or connected with the company, but some of the teams that I'm working with are using it, and it's a platform to communicate with your investors. And so the very best founders I'm seeing are sending monthly updates. They're being very transparent. So first of all, everybody that's involved in the company has context. More, or at least more context than you would if you're just getting pulled in for a 1-hour coffee chat and then you're being asked for some advice. So they're getting the updates. Second of all, there are very clear asks that are going out to everybody. And so, if you want to effectively use advisors, make sure, once a month you have a to-do, which is, how can my advisors help me? And am I asking them for that help? And then number 3, they're giving kudos to the investors that are contributing. And, like any good leaderboard in sales, if you want people to do something, make it transparent. And so all of a sudden people are seeing, oh my goodness, wow, look at that. Matt's made 5 introductions. I haven't made any. Okay, I want to be on this leaderboard the next time, or I'm going to look like I'm not carrying my weight. And so I think just being transparent about all that will go a long way.
I love it. Great advice. And I'm going to make sure that companies I work with are on something like Get Cabal, because I will say there's two things. One of the things I really liked about Chorus was that you had an organized cap table with a system to manage it in Kata. One of the things that frustrates me, in fact, it's one company I've been advising since 20, I want to say 16, maybe earlier, 2015 perhaps. And they've had several missteps with having to reproduce documents and, oh, I'm sorry, that wasn't valid, and we got to read it. And none of that would happen if you get the right advice and put it in a system like Carter. I'm sure there are others that are equally good, which is great. Get Cabal sounds great, and I'm reflecting on a company that I actually invested in recently called Great Question that does product research. Every month, this founder, he's not a first-time founder, and I think it shows. I get an investor update, and to your point, he's very clever with gamification. It's like, here's the ask this month. Oh, and 2 shout outs from this month. This month I got a shout out. You know what it did? It made me want to help him more because of the ego. You're right? I want to be on that list every month about adding value. So really great advice, Roy. I appreciate that. And look, this has been great. I'd love to round it out with something. For those of you who are just listening and not watching video, Roy looks fantastic and healthy. And one of the things you said to me today was, without our health, we have nothing. And you and I have both seen this. And I've been through it personally with my own startups many, many years ago, where you kind of neglect the self through this process because it's all consuming. What practical, like really specific practical tips do you have for that founder who, might have a look down and think, not everything is feeling or looking as good as it should, and I'm worried about my heart, my health, my mental well-being? Or what would you say to folks?
If I were speaking to a founder, I would basically say that the most interesting concept that I learned way too late is the concept of a complex system. And startups, companies are complex systems. Once you get beyond, maybe 15 employees and 20 customers, you can no longer predict how a certain input is going to affect the system. And so one of the biggest misconceptions I had is that by me doing more things, I was going to somehow impact the trajectory of the company in meaningful ways. And the truth is, I was doing a lot, but how much of it was truly moving the needle, I don't know. So once a company gets beyond a certain stage, you're running a complex system. And I'd encourage everybody to go, spend 20 minutes reading up on it in Wikipedia. So what are the things that you can control? You can control the people you hire. You can control clarifying the values or the operating principles and how people should act and make decisions when you're not in the room. And you can reinforce them, and you can reward them, and you can hire for them. And most importantly, you can fire for them. That sends a very strong signal. So things like that will truly move the needle. So the first thing is, within that context, I would say you're not as important as you think you are in the moment. And so you can step away, you can take some time. The second part is I think showing up at your best. If you are running a team that's 20, 50, 100, 200 people, the productivity of that team is going to dwarf anything that you're individually doing. And so when you show up to an all hands, or when you show up to an office and you're tired and you're not looking healthy, you're not acting energetic, all these things, that sends a signal to the team and people pick up on it. And so I really do think that taking care of your mental health and your physical health is the right decision for the company. You will show up better, and as a result, everybody else will do better. They'll be their best selves, and that will have an impact. So very tactically, what worked for me? I cut out all caffeine because I wanted to improve the quality of my sleep. So I started tracking my sleep. I got myself an Oura ring. It tracks my sleep. I see how much deep sleep I get, how much REM sleep I get. It's a reminder that I need 7.5 hours of sleep. That led to some other habits that helped me improve the quality of my sleep. So, shut down my phone, by 10 p.m. Don't check emails. Don't open the computer by early in the morning. Cut out caffeine, and so on and so forth. Number 2, diet. It sounds simple, but we're the result of the fuel you put into your system. And so I very methodically, actually, I'm wearing one right now. I'm wearing a continuous glucose monitor. And I want to see how certain foods affect my mood, my energy levels, my sleep. And so I just started eating better. I was really cheap, and I really wanted to get a Peloton to sneak workouts in because I couldn't find the time to go to a gym, and I thought it was too expensive. And then my coach just said, Roy, buy the fucking bike. And my wife had been telling me that for months, and I was like, oh, but it's expensive. I just finished my 400th ride on the Peloton. And the fact that it was there and I could just jump on, and I set a goal for myself to sweat every day, even if it's just a little bit, even if it's not, it just get on and sweat. And that builds momentum. And the sort of the last part that I'll end with is, I'm a big believer in, or I guess, evolutionary biology resonates with me a lot. And we are robots that are controlled by chemicals. Your brain can't tell where a certain chemical is coming from. So when you have a good day at work, you feel great. When you have a bad day at work, you feel terrible. The problem with a startup is that it's out of your control. So much of what happens in the startup is completely out of your control. And the more senior you are, the further removed you are from the thing that caused the situation to actually feeling the situation. So as a CEO, if we have a bad quarter, it's because of decisions and the person I was and the company we were 6 months ago. So that's very messed up. I mean, imagine if, you were at home and you were having, you're on the couch with your wife watching a movie and she just slaps you out of nowhere. And you go, what was that for? Everything was perfect. You say, well, that was for something you did 2 months ago. That's kind of what it's like being a CEO or a founder. So how did I balance that out? Well, if you do things that are fully within your control, you can mimic those positive drugs in your system. So if you say, hey, I'm going to sign up and run a 10K and I'm going to train, you deciding to get up and train is 100% within your control. And so by doing that, you'll check the box, you'll get that endorphin rush, you'll achieve that goal. And so by setting goals outside of work that were fully within my control, that would help me balance out all of these emotions that I was feeling at work, which were largely not in my control. And that just went a long way. So sleep, food, exercise, and control.
Yeah, you give me shivers because it's exactly how I think about it, right? And I can share the same stories, and I want everyone to think really hard about this. And the one thing I'll add to that is, I'll ask you actually, when you were doing that, did you tend to exercise first thing in the morning or later in the day, or vary it up?
I really want to be one of those people that can keep a constant schedule, but it's hard for me. So what I did like, there was a period where I did it first thing in the morning. What I liked about it was I just said, you could walk into the office with a win under your belt. That's what I liked about it. But at the end of the day, I think the mentality of, hey, I'm just somebody who doesn't miss a workout, right? So if I don't get to it in the morning because something comes up, I just say, you know what, I'm going to get to it before I get to bed. And then that's sort of the, I have 2 young kids, and I just tell my kids, you need a strong mind before you can have a strong body. And so it's about, in my mind, strengthening your mind. And it doesn't have to be sports. It can be anything, but I think sports works well.
Very important there, which was about deciding who you are. I am a person who does not miss a workout. And that, that's not, it's so important to pick the right internal conversation and phrases to define yourself, because it gives you the freedom, the discipline of that thinking gives you the freedom you need, or that comes from being able to know that you can always do it. It's like, oh, I missed it this morning, but that's okay. I'm not a person who misses a workout. I can do it later. I'm a person who likes to do it first thing in the morning. And the reason being that, to your point, is like, I've already won the day. Like by 7:30 in the morning, I've won nothing that happens for the rest of the day. Well, it's 2 things. It depends on the type of exercise or thing you do. For me, oftentimes I like to your point about sweating, doing something really hard, because then I say to myself, well, nothing left in this day will be as hard as what I've already gotten through. you know, and it's done. So I've won. So yeah, no, I think that's great advice. And you know, to your point, there's really no excuse. If you can get a Peloton, it can be right next to you in your desk. So many Zoom calls I have these days, I can see a Peloton in the back left-hand corner. You know, it's like, so it is easy. I hope everybody takes that to heart, because I have heard, I'm reading a tweet from a very, very famous venture capitalist that everybody knows, who said, if I see a VP of sales who's, you know, healthy and fit and lean and trim, then I know they're not going to deliver the, let's say, I'm paraphrasing, they're not the best that can be, because the best VPs don't have the time to do all that. I'm like, well, actually, I think completely the opposite to that. And it seems like you do too. So, Roy, this has been amazing. We've had an incredible half hour. I really appreciate it. So many great show notes that will come out of this. Look forward to sharing this with the world. And look, I understand you don't know exactly what it looks like right now, but I'm excited to hear about your next stanza, what that looks like, Life Beyond Chorus, coming to me from Switzerland. So we'll keep an eye on you, and I hope this won't be our last live chat.
No, it sounds great. And by the way, I have, as maybe it's partially therapy, like conversations like this, but I did start sort of synthesizing some of my learning. I set up a website, www.raanani.com, RAANANI.com, with some blog posts. And so often if I'm talking to entrepreneurs and I see that there's a question that I'm hearing a couple of times, I'll share my thoughts on it. And so if it's helpful, take a look, and happy to hear about topics that are on folks' mind in case we want to go a bit deeper on anything.
Love it. I'll make sure that that link is in the show notes. Roy, have a great evening, and thanks for the great chat.
Great to hear from you. Thanks, Matt.